The candle smoke curled into the night, like a signal fire meant for someone else. My name had been carved into the island months ago, into the dock, the plans, the silence. Now my brother's laughter echoed where mine was supposed to break. And I stood offshore, watching my life celebrate without me. The island rose from the black water like a secret I'd paid to keep. Limestone cliffs, palm shadows cut sharp by floodlights. Music thudded, deep, expensive, alive. Boats ferried guests in white and gold, champagne flashing in their hands. Every detail was mine. Every detail had my blood in it. I checked the invitation on my phone again, or what used to be one. We've decided to go a different direction. Don't come, no signature. He didn't need one. I remembered when he asked for help. Just for one night, he said. You've got the island sitting there. It's my 40th. Family. Family. The word had weight then. It sank now. I watched him step onto the dock. Arms open, soaking in applause. My younger brother. Same face, softer edges. He wore my father's watch, the one that was promised to me. The one I'd paid the hospital bills to earn. He kissed his wife. He waved to the crowd like a man who had never borrowed anything in his life. The boat captain looked at me. You want me to take you in? I shook my head. Not yet. The night had to ripen. I'd built the island after everything else burned. After the company's sale. After the divorce papers slid across marble like a blade. The island was quiet. Control, no surprises. I kept it private because people ruin things when they think they're invited. Except my brother didn't think. He took. I slipped into the water with a mask and fins. The music muffled into a heartbeat. Beneath the dock, cables ran like veins, power lighting sound. All routed through a central hub I designed myself. Redundancies. Overrides. I surfaced behind the rocks unseen, and climbed up where the staff entrance cut through the foliage. Inside, the party was a cathedral of excess. Ice sculptures sweating, a string quartet bleeding into a DJ set. Guests toasted my brother for his vision. His taste. Someone mentioned how generous it was of him to host on such an exclusive island. I passed through them like a ghost. No one recognized me. That hurt more than I expected. My brother took the stage. I want to thank everyone for being here, he said, voice amplified, confident. This place means a lot to me. It represents everything I've worked for. I felt something go still inside my chest. I reached the hub room. Entered the code I taught him once. Years ago, when he begged to understand how things worked. He never really learned, he just memorized. I didn't kill the power, that would be loud. Obvious. Cheap. I isolated sections. The music stuttered, just for a second. Laughter rippled, uncertain. Then the lights over the east terrace dimmed, plunging half the guests into shadow. The ocean breeze carried confusion like salt. My brother laughed it off. Hey, ambient lighting. Very exclusive. I watched from behind the glass. I brought the screens online. Every monitor across the island flickered, then settled. Old footage. Home video. 2 boys in a backyard, one always stepping in front of the other. A graduation where only one name was called. A hospital room, our father whispering apologies to me, while my brother argued with the doctor about costs. The sound cut in. You said you'd split it. My younger self said on the recording. I needed it more, my brother replied. The party froze. My brother turned, color draining. What is this? I stepped onto the stage before the crowd could answer. Silence fell hard. He stared at me like I was a trick of the lights. You weren't invited? I know, I said. My voice carried without effort. I'd tuned the acoustics myself. That's why this is working? Murmurs. Phones rose? This island, I continued, was built so I could disappear. You rented it so you could be seen. He swallowed. This isn't the time. You took my invite back, I said. You took my father's watch. You took credit for things you never touched with your hands. He stepped toward me, lowering his voice. We can talk later? There is no later. I tapped my phone. The final screen lit up. Contracts. Transfers. The rental agreement, with his signature, buried under clauses he never read. A clause about liability. Another about misrepresentation. The power shifted again this time. The lights sharpened. Security doors slid closed. Not locked, just controlled. You rented the island, I said. You didn't control it. His wife looked at him, then at me. What did you do? I leaned close enough for him to hear me over the crowd's breath. I let you finish. Authorities arrived by boat, lights cutting the water. Someone had called. An anonymous tip about fraud, unpaid vendors, misused funds, all true. All documented. As they led him away, he finally spoke. You didn't have to destroy me. I watched the watch slip from his wrist as they cuffed him. It hit the deck with a small, final sound. I didn't, I said. You did. I just stopped keeping quiet. The guests dispersed. The music died. The island exhaled. At dawn I sat alone on the dock, the water calm again. I picked up the watch, felt its weight settle where it always belonged. The island was silent. Private. And finally mine. The sun rose without apology. It revealed everything the night had tried to disguise: trampled grass, spilled champagne, abandoned heels sinking into sand. The island looked older in daylight, like it had witnessed something irreversible and chosen not to comment. I stayed. That surprised me. I'd always left the island before dawn, before memory had time to attach itself. But this morning, I walked its perimeter barefoot, feeling every cut of coral, every sharp reminder that ownership doesn't mean comfort. Boats moved in the distance, authorities clearing equipment, staff collecting fragments of a celebration that no longer belonged to anyone. My phone buzzed once. Then again. Messages stacked like debris. What the hell was that? Is he really being charged? Call me. I didn't answer. By noon. The island was quiet except for the generators, and the birds reclaiming their airspace. I poured a drink and sat where the stage had been, staring at the empty space where my brother stood, believing the world was finally his. I thought about how easy it had been for him to take things from me. Not because he was smarter. Not because he worked harder. Because I let him. Silence is a generous accomplice. A helicopter arrived just after lunch. My lawyer stepped out. Immaculate, unsurprised. She'd warned me once, if you ever decide to stop protecting him, make sure you're ready to lose the idea of family. I nodded then. I understood now. His being processed, she said, sitting beside me. Charges will stick. There's evidence from 3 countries. He thought your systems were decorative. They're not, I said. No, she agreed. They're surgical. She slid a folder across the table. There's one more thing. He claims coercion. Says you orchestrated everything. I laughed quietly. Of course he does. You'll need to testify. I looked out at the water. I will. She studied me. This isn't just about him, is it? I didn't answer. She left soon after, the helicopter lifting dust and leaves into a brief, chaotic storm. When it settled, the island was still. That night, I slept in the main house for the first time. The walls held echoes, voices I never invited, laughter that didn't belong to me. I didn't turn on music. I let the quiet press against me until it hurt, until it felt honest. Dreams came in fragments. My father's voice, my brother's back as he walked away. The watch ticking too loud in the dark. I woke before dawn and swam out past the reef, letting the cold strip me down to something simpler. Anger doesn't survive well in open water. It sinks or dissolves. What came back with me was heavier. Grief, maybe, or clarity. Weeks passed. The trial moved fast. Public interest sharpened it. My brother sat across the room in tailored suits, still trying to look composed, still believing charm could reroute consequences. When he spoke, he used words like a misunderstanding and shared assets. When I spoke, I used dates, numbers, receipts. He didn't look at me until the verdict. Guilty. The word landed without drama. No gasp. No collapse. Just a rearrangement of reality. He turned then, eyes searching my face for something. Regret, mercy, recognition. I gave him nothing. Not because I was cruel. Because I was done feeding the version of him that survived on my reactions. Outside, cameras flashed. Questions flew. Do you feel vindicated? Was this revenge? Is he still your brother? I said nothing. Silence, used correctly, is devastating. I returned to the island permanently. I fired the staff he'd hired, replaced them with people who asked fewer questions and listened more. I dismantled the stage, the lighting rigs, the screens. I planted trees where guests had danced. Slow things. Things that take years to show their work. At night, I sat with the watch and listened to it tick. Time doesn't heal. It just keeps score. One evening months later, a letter arrived by boat. Prison stationery. My brother's handwriting, still familiar, still arrogant in its curves. I don't know who you are anymore, it read. You could have warned me. I folded it carefully and placed it in the fire. Watched the words curl into nothing. Another letter came weeks later, then another. I burned them all, not in anger, in maintenance. Like pruning something that refuses to die quietly. The island changed with the seasons. Storms tested it, sun hardened it. So did I. Sometimes I thought about inviting people again. Friends, strangers' noise. But every time I imagined it, I saw the dock crowded with expectations, with hands reaching for what I'd built. I wasn't ready to negotiate myself into smaller pieces again. One night, standing at the edge of the water, I realized the revenge hadn't been the night of the party. That was just exposure. The revenge was choosing myself afterward. Choosing not to explain. Not to repair what was never mutual. Not to soften the truth so someone else could sleep better. The island didn't forgive me. It didn't need to. It stood, solid and indifferent, holding my shadow at sunset, my reflection at dawn. A place I no longer used to hide, but to remember exactly what it cost to stop being invisible. Far out at sea, a boat passed, music faint on the wind. I watched it until it disappeared, then turned back toward the house, toward the quiet I'd earned. The candles were gone. The invitation was gone. What remained was control, and the calm. Terrifying knowledge that I would never give it away again. Winter came quietly, the way truth does once the shouting stops. The island learned new colors, steel water. Bruised skies, palms stripped down to bones by wind. I let it. I stopped fixing things immediately. Letting damage exist was a kind of discipline. A reminder that control didn't mean erasing every scar. I received notice of the appeal in a thin envelope that smelled faintly of toner and desperation. My brother's lawyers were trying to unravel intent, to suggest I'd set a trap. They were half right. But traps only work on people already moving in the wrong direction. I agreed to one visit. The prison sat inland, concrete pressed flat against the horizon. I passed through metal and glass and procedures that treated everyone the same. That was new for him. That was the point. He looked smaller, not thinner, smaller. As if the room had finally been scaled correctly, and he'd lost the illusion of dominance that came with oversized spaces. You came? He said, trying to sound casual. I won't again, I replied, sitting down. He smiled tightly. You always were dramatic. I watched him carefully. The old reflex to scan for advantage still twitched in his eyes. You wrote that you didn't know who I was anymore? He shrugged. You changed? No, I said. I stopped compensating. That landed. He leaned back, crossing his arms. You enjoyed it, didn't you, the party? The humiliation? I enjoyed the accuracy, I said. There's a difference? Silence stretched. He filled it, like he always had. What could have worked something out? You didn't have to end me. I thought of the island at dawn, of trees growing where people once applauded. You weren't ended, I said. You were revealed. His jaw tightened. You think you're better than me now? I stood. I don't think about you at all. That was the cruelty. Not anger. Not triumph. Absence. I left him staring at the table, hands clenched around nothing. Back on the island. I felt lighter than I expected. Not relieved, just unburdened. Closure is overrated. Distance does more with less effort. I started documenting things not for court, not for legacy. For myself. Systems diagrams, journals without metaphors. Lists of what worked and what failed. I wrote about my father honestly for the first time. About how love can coexist with disappointment. About how inheritance isn't always money, it's patterns, passed down like bad code. A storm hit hard in early spring. Waves climbed the rocks, tore apart the old dock. I stood in the rain and watched it happen. When it was over, I didn't rebuild it the same way. I shortened it. Made arrivals deliberate. Fewer places to hide. People began reaching out again. Investors, old friends. A woman I once loved, careful and curious. I answered some messages. I ignored others. Boundaries became muscle memory. One evening, while reviewing security logs, I noticed a small boat circling too close. No transponder, no request to dock. I watched it for an hour before activating the lights. It turned away. I smiled. Not because I'd scared someone off. Because the system worked without drama. Because I didn't need to be seen to be effective. News came later that my brother's appeal had failed. Reduced sentence, maybe, but the core held. He would sit with the consequences longer than he'd ever sat with me. I felt nothing sharp. Just a dull settling, like sediment after a flood. On my birthday. I cooked for myself, no candles, no guests. I ate slowly, barefoot on the terrace, watching the sky burn orange and then cool into indigo. I thought about the title my life could have had, the one people would have given it if they'd been allowed to narrate. Victim. Villain. Recluse. Genius. None of it fit anymore. Later that night, I opened the old safe beneath the stairs. Inside were things I hadn't touched since the party, backup drives, printed contracts. The first invitation mock-up I designed before my brother ever asked for the island. My name centered. Elegant. Confident. I took it out and held it to the light. Then I tore it in half. The island hummed quietly around me, systems breathing, waves keeping time. Control wasn't rigid anymore, it was responsive. Alive. I slept deeply. In the morning, I began planning something new. Not a party. Not a spectacle. A project that would take years and ask nothing in return. Restoration. Research. Quiet funding for things that didn't carry my name. Not redemption. Alignment. As the sun rose, I stood at the edge of the property and looked back at the house, the land, the water that reflected me without distortion. I saw someone intact. Not untouched, but whole enough to stop explaining himself. The past didn't follow me here. I made sure of that. And for the first time since the candles burned down on a night that was never meant for me, I felt something like peace. Not the soft kind. Not the forgiving kind, but the kind that comes from knowing exactly where the line is, and never crossing it again. Peace didn't last the way movies promised. It never does. It thinned first, then frayed, then sharpened into something watchful. The island taught me that. I woke one night to an alert I hadn't heard in months. A low-frequency pulse meant only for me. Perimeter breach. Not violent, intentional. Someone had arrived without fear. I didn't reach for a weapon. I reached for the cameras. The boat was modest. Weathered hull. No luxury, no disguise. It docked where the old pier used to be, careful. As if the person aboard respected boundaries they hadn't yet earned. A woman stepped onto the sand. She moved like someone who had already decided not to run. I watched her walk the path I'd rebuilt narrower on purpose. She stopped twice, reading the land the way engineers read fault lines. When she reached the house, she didn't knock, she waited. That mattered. I met her on the terrace, the ocean behind me black and patient. "You're trespassing," I said. She nodded once. "I know." No excuses, no urgency. She was older than me by a few years, eyes tired in a way that came from responsibility, not regret. "My name is Mara," she said. "The word with your brother." Testing the air, past tense. She added quickly. "Before the island." "Before the trial?" I didn't invite her in. "You have 3 minutes." She smiled faintly. "That's generous." She told me about shell companies nested like insects. About funds diverted long before my brother touched my island. About a pattern that didn't start with him and wouldn't end in prison. "He was sloppy," she said, "but he wasn't the architect." I already knew that, or suspected, but suspicion is a luxury, proof is a weapon. "Why come here?" I asked. "Because you're the only person he ever underestimated who survived it," she said. "And because I'm out of time?" She pulled a drive from her pocket and set it on the table between us. Didn't slide it. Didn't push. Just placed it there, like an offering that knew it might be refused. "They'll bury this," she said. I tried to surface it the right way. I picked up the drive. Its weight was insignificant. Its implications weren't. I asked. She hesitated. "Just once. Immunity, or at least a delay, enough to disappear." I thought of the island again. How it had become a place of alignment, not reaction. How revenge had taught me restraint, not hunger. "You worked with him?" I said. "You helped." "Yes," she said. And I stopped. That too mattered. I gave her a place to sleep, not comfort, shelter. The difference is important. Over the next week, we worked in silence broken only by verification, cross-referencing, testing integrity. The files were real, worse than real, elegant. Decades of laundering hidden behind philanthropy and offshore benevolence. Names surfaced. Names that appeared on boards and donor walls and honorary plaques. My brother was a branch. This was the root. Mara didn't ask questions about the island. She respected it. That made her dangerous in a way I recognized. People who understand systems don't fear them, they adapt. When the data was ready, I didn't leak it. I curated it. There's a difference between exposure and annihilation. Exposure invites debate. Annihilation leaves only silence. I sent fragments to journalists who still verified before publishing. To regulators who hated each other but loved jurisdiction more. I staggered the releases, forced reactions before counter-narratives could form. The world shifted, slowly at first. Then all at once, foundations froze, boards resigned, investigations bloomed like bruises. The names that mattered tried to speak and found no microphones waiting. My brother called from prison. I didn't answer. Mara left at dawn on the 10th day. No farewell. Just a note written cleanly, without apology. You didn't save me, you gave me time. That's more than I deserved. I burned the note after reading it twice. Weeks later, I stood on the highest point of the island and watched a storm roll in from the east. Not destructive. Cleansing. The kind that resets pressure systems and leaves things breathing easier. I understood then that revenge hadn't been the point. Agency had. The power to decide when to act and when not to. To choose silence without being erased by it. To build systems that didn't just protect me, but corrected imbalances without spectacle. I started receiving invitations again. Conferences, panels, quiet dinners with people who spoke carefully now. I declined most, accepted a few. On my terms. One night, long after the world stopped shaking, I walked to the edge of the water and dropped the watch into the sea. It disappeared instantly. Time freed, I didn't feel loss. I felt completion. The island remained private but not sealed. Knowledge moved through it. Decisions were made here that never needed my face attached. Influence without ownership. Control without dominance. Sometimes, in the early hours before light. I remembered the party, the music, the laughter, the moment the screens turned and the truth arrived uninvited. I didn't regret it. But I didn't need it anymore. What I built afterward mattered more. The island held. The systems held, and so did I, not because I took something back. But because I learned exactly when to let go. Letting go didn't mean retreat. It meant precision. The island became a node, quiet, deliberate, listening more than speaking. I stopped thinking of it as mine in the possessive sense, and started thinking of it as a point of convergence. Information passed through. Decisions crystallized. Consequences unfolded elsewhere. I stayed mostly unseen. That was new power. One morning months after the last release, a secure channel lit up with a request I hadn't expected. Government, adjacent, not official, not informal. The kind of message that acknowledged what I'd done without congratulating me for it. We'd like to talk about cooperation. I ignored it for 3 days. Not as leverage. As calibration. When I finally replied, it was with conditions. Distance, autonomy, no names attached, no appearances. I wasn't interested in being absorbed into the machinery that had failed so thoroughly before. They agreed too quickly. That told me everything. I didn't join them. I intersected. From the island, I helped map flows, money, influence, narrative. I showed them where pressure would fracture instead of explode. How to let structures collapse under their own contradictions. It wasn't heroic. It was mechanical. Systems fail when they're forced to explain themselves. At night, when the work ended, I walked the perimeter alone. The sea was a constant, indifferent presence. It didn't care who I'd been or who I was becoming. That steadiness grounded me. Occasionally, the past tested me. A journalist found my name and tried to frame the story as a personal vendetta turned crusade. I sent no response. The piece ran anyway. Speculative and thin. It died within a week, replaced by louder, messier scandals. Noise eats itself. Another time an old friend arrived unannounced by seaplane. Carrying nostalgia like a passport. He talked about the old days, about who I used to be. He asked if I was lonely. I told him the truth. No, I'm selective. He didn't understand. That was fine. The island doesn't reward understanding, it rewards respect. Years passed that way, not marked by events, but by refinement. I simplified systems. Removed redundancies I no longer needed. Let some structures decay intentionally. Control, I learned, isn't about holding everything together. It's about knowing what can fall without consequence. My brother stopped writing. I heard about him through intermediaries. Early release. Quiet settlement. A life reduced to margins. He never reached out directly again. Perhaps he finally understood that the absence of my attention was permanent. One evening, as the light fell low and the water turned glassy, I sat on the terrace and felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not peace, satisfaction. Not in what I'd taken or exposed, but in what I'd built after the fire. A life that didn't require validation through proximity or applause. A self that didn't need to be invited. I thought back to the first night, the candles, the music, the shock on his face when the screens turned. That version of me had needed witnesses. Needed symmetry. This one didn't. The island had changed me in ways I hadn't planned. It had taught me patience without passivity. Solitude without isolation. It had stripped away the reflex to react and replaced it with intention. One morning, I woke to the sound of laughter. It took a moment to place it. Children distant carried on the wind. A research vessel anchored offshore, part of a program I funded quietly. Marine biologists, interns. Curiosity without agenda. I watched them through binoculars as they worked, careful, respectful. They didn't know who I was. They didn't need to. That anonymity felt like freedom. Later that day, I opened the old archive one last time, the files that had once defined my sense of injustice. I reviewed them without emotion, then encrypted and sealed them away. Not destroyed, just dormant. Power doesn't need to be brandished to exist. At sunset, I walked to the cliff edge and stood where the island dropped clean into sea and sky. The horizon was sharp, uncompromising. I realized then that revenge had been a chapter, not a theme. Necessary, finite. It had carved space for something else to grow. Responsibility, not to family, not to legacy, but to myself. I had learned the cost of silence and the cost of spectacle. I chose neither now. I chose timing. As darkness settled, the island lights came on softly, measured, restrained. No floodlights, no stage. Just enough to see where I was going. I turned back toward the house, toward the life I'd constructed piece by piece after everything else was stripped away. No invitations. No borrowed applause. Only alignment. Only control that didn't need to announce itself. And in that quiet, I finally understood the truth my brother never did. The most devastating revenge isn't destruction. It's irrelevance. Irrelevance settled slowly, like dusk, inevitable, unnoticed until it was complete. The world kept turning without asking me to steer it. Names rose and fell. Outrage flared and burned itself out. The island remained, patient as bedrock. I learned to read its moods the way sailors read weather, subtle shifts. Warnings whispered before storms. Control became less about command and more about listening. Then one night, the sea changed, not the color, the sound. I felt it before the alarms registered, a pressure in the chest, a low tremor carried through stone. I stood on the terrace and watched the horizon swallow a light that should have held steady. A vessel moving without declaration. Purposeful. Wrong. I didn't reach for cameras first. I closed my eyes. Patterns surfaced, the old ones, the kind you never fully unlearn. The boat cut its engine outside the reef. A swimmer crossed the gap with efficient strokes. Someone who had trained not to panic, not to hesitate. They surfaced where the rocks break the swell and climbed with hands that knew how to be quiet. By the time the perimeter lights came on, they were already inside. I waited. The house breathed around me, systems humming, doors aware. Footsteps approached the inner hall, slow and deliberate. Whoever it was wanted to be seen now. When they stepped into the light, I recognized him. Not my brother. Someone older, narrow-eyed. A man who had learned to survive by making others invisible. One of the roots. A name that never appeared on plaques. The kind that stayed clean by never signing anything that mattered. "You took a lot from me," he said, voice calm, almost polite. "I didn't take," I replied. I revealed. He smiled thinly. "That's what men like you say when they want to feel absolved." He glanced around, taking in the restraint. The absence of trophies. "You live small for someone who could live loud." "I live exact," I said. He chuckled. "Your brother begged once. Did you know that?" The word beg landed like a test. "He begged me to stop," the man continued. "I told him the same thing I'm telling you now. Systems don't care about family. They care about continuity. I stepped aside, giving him a clear line of sight to the ocean. You came to threaten me? I came to understand you, he said. Men like you don't stop. They either burn out or turn inward. I wanted to see which one you were. And now? I asked. He studied me longer this time. The kind of look that calculates cost instead of courage. Now I think you're dangerous in a way that's inconvenient. I nodded. That's accurate. Silence thickened. Outside, the sea exhaled against stone. You could have had more, he said finally. Influence, protection, we reward restraint. You punish it too, I said, eventually. He took a step closer. This doesn't end cleanly. I smiled, just enough. It already did. I tapped the table once. The house shifted, not with locks or lights, but with information, signals routed, timers released. Not traps, mirrors, he frowned, sensing the change. What did you do? I made your arrival boring, I said, and your departure inevitable. He reached for his pocket. The door behind him opened. Footsteps, multiple. Calm, professional, he turned surprised, not afraid yet. That came a second later, when he realized the men entering weren't mine. They were his. Or rather, they had been. Defections don't happen loudly. They happen after patterns repeat long enough to become obvious. After loyalty starts to look like liability. As they took him, he met my eyes once more. You think this makes you clean? No, I said. It makes me finished. They left without resistance. The house returned to its low hum. Outside, the tide pulled back. Unbothered. I stood alone again. At dawn, I walked the island one last time. Not because I was leaving, because I was marking an ending. I passed the place where the stage had been, now thick with growth. The dock, short or honest. The cliff where I'd learned the difference between power and peace. Each place held a version of me I no longer needed to carry. I stopped at the edge of the water, and let the cold take my ankles. Thought of my father. Of what he'd meant to teach and failed. Thought of my brother, of the hollow hunger that had driven him to mistake proximity for ownership. I didn't forgive them. I understood them. Understanding is heavier. It asks more. The island had been my answer to chaos, a boundary made of stone and intention. But answers aren't meant to be permanent. They're meant to lead you somewhere quieter. I returned to the house and initiated the transfer. Ownership moved into a trust with no name attached. Stewardship replaced possession. The systems stayed. My presence didn't need to. By noon, a boat waited at the reef. Modest. Anonymous. Enough. I packed lightly. There was nothing here I couldn't leave without losing myself. That was the final test. I passed it. As the boat pulled away, I watched the island recede, not with longing, not with pride, but with gratitude. It had given me shape when I needed edges. Now it could stand without me. The sea widened. The horizon softened. Somewhere behind me, a party that never was had finally finished echoing. Candles long burned down. Music absorbed by salt and time. Invitations dissolved into myth. Ahead, there was no title waiting. No witness required. Just motion. Just breath. I closed my eyes and felt the engine settle into rhythm. The kind that doesn't rush. The kind that endures. Revenge had been a beginning disguised as an ending. This was the end. Not loud. Not cruel. Unforgettable only to the man who walked away whole, carrying nothing he hadn't chosen to keep. The water carried me farther than I expected. Days blurred into a steady cadence of sky, salt, and wake. I didn't name the destination because names create gravity. I let the boat move the way decisions should, forward, without rehearsal. At night, I slept lightly. Not from fear, but from habit. You don't dismantle vigilance overnight. You teach it new posture. Ports came and went. Small ones. Forgettable ones. Places where no one asked questions because no one cared enough to invent them. I learned how anonymity feels when it's earned, not forced. It's quieter than solitude, warmer than isolation. In one port, I rented a room above a bakery. Every morning the smell of bread pulled me awake before thought could intrude. I sat by the window with coffee and watched people argue gently about ordinary things, prices, weather directions. No one performed. No one postured. Life unfolded without an audience. That was new too. I stayed there longer than planned. I worked remotely, but not on anything with reach. Small systems, local optimizations. I fixed things that didn't matter to the world but mattered to someone. The reward wasn't recognition. It was completion. At night, the past sometimes tried to return. Not the island. Not the party. My brother. I saw him once in a dream, standing on the dock that no longer existed, asking the same question he always had. Why wasn't I enough? I woke before answering. Some questions don't deserve closure. They survive on it. I didn't dream of him again. Weeks turned into months. I stopped checking the channels that once defined my influence. When something significant happened, I heard about it secondhand, stripped of urgency. Distance edits drama into fact. One afternoon a storm rolled in fast and hard. I stood under an awning and watched rain erase the street. For a moment, the sound of it on metal took me back to the island, to nights of surveillance and waiting. The feeling passed. That's how I knew it was over. Not because I'd forgotten, but because memory no longer tightened my chest. It had weight, not teeth. I left the port the next morning. I moved inland. Different country, different language. I let myself be bad at things again. I mispronounced words, I got lost. I asked for help and accepted it without negotiating my worth. Humbling is not the same as diminishing. One evening, in a small town with no reason to remember me, I found a house for sale on the edge of a cliff. Not dramatic, just honest. Stone wind? A single tree bent permanently toward the sea. I bought it without ceremony. There were no systems to install. No redundancies to map. The house didn't need to be protected from people like me. I fixed the roof myself. Burned my hand once. Learned where the floorboards creaked. Learned which windows whistled in winter. I planted something I wouldn't see mature for years. Time reclaimed. Occasionally someone asked what I did. I build things, I said. It was true enough. At night, I wrote. Not plans, not strategies, observations, fragments. The way light shifts before rain. The sound of waves when no one is watching them. The way control feels when it's no longer armored. I didn't publish anything. Writing doesn't need witnesses to be real. Years passed quietly. Not empty quiet. On my birthday, I walked to the cliff edge and stood where land gave way to air. No candles, no reminders. Just the wind and the long, patient motion of the sea. I thought briefly of the island. Not with longing, with respect. It had been a crucible. A place where I learned the cost of silence and the danger of spectacle. Where revenge taught me restraint, and restraint taught me when to leave. I hadn't abandoned it. I'd outgrown it. Below me, waves broke against rock and withdrew, leaving no mark. That, I realized, was the final lesson. Power doesn't need permanence to be real. It needs intention. And the courage to release it when its work is done. I turned back toward the house as the light softened, carrying nothing but breath and balance. The past stayed where it belonged, not buried, not honored. Simply finished. And somewhere far behind me, on an island that no longer needed a keeper, the silence held. The wind followed me home, gentle now, no longer asking questions. Inside the house, dusk settled into corners I had learned by heart. I lit a single lamp, not to push the dark away, but to share the space with it. I poured water, not wine. Sat by the window. Let the day finish in its own time. There was no reckoning left to come. No name waiting to be cleared or restored. What I had lost had already given me what it could, and what I had gained no longer needed defending. My life no longer hinged on moments sharp enough to be remembered by others. Outside, the sea kept moving. Indifferent and exact. I understood it now. Not as escape, not as threat, but as continuity. I breathed in. I breathed out. The boy who once waited for invitations was gone. The man who needed witnesses was gone. What remained was quieter and stronger than both. I closed the window, turned off the lamp, and let the night take its place. Not as an ending, but as a resting point. Tomorrow would arrive without ceremony. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.